I realize anymore that a lot of the things that I refer to are part of the esoteria of my generation, which I don't even need to reveal because it reveals itself in the way that I talk and the pop culture references that I am so adoring of. Not everybody had the pleasure, the great privilege of growing up with Mr. Rogers. And I mean that. I know that I often sound irreverent, at least irreverent. But the fact is, Mr. Rogers and the fact that Mr. Rogers and Sesame Street and all of those things happened at all, I consider it a real gift because, there's so much out there now. And back in the day, I used to sort of resent the fact that we had one channel. Sometimes two on a good clear day when the rabbit ears were working right. But Mr. Rogers was always there, and dude was a sage and a saint and a snappy dresser. But Mr. Rogers said, and I swear these things really made an impression on me. He said, "We live in a world in which we need to share responsibility. It's easy to say, it's not my child, not my community, not my world, not my problem. And then there are those who see the need and respond. And I consider those people my heroes." Well, I couldn't say it better than Mr. Rogers, but today I'm talking with one of my new heroes, Sarah Keiser from Wild Oat Hollow. And Sarah's amazing. You are all going to want to live with her, be adopted by her, live in her community with her, and make things happen like what Sarah has made happen. And she will be the first one to say that she didn't do it alone because it takes a community. And that's what we're talking about, some things like that, but we're talking about a lot of other things today. So without further delay, I would love to get into my conversation with Sarah Keiser after a word from Jesse and our sponsors.
Today's episode of the No-Till Market Garden podcast is brought to you by Local Line. Get ahead this year with Local Line. Make the switch to Local Line and grow your farm to new heights. Local Line is the most comprehensive sales software built for farmers and food hubs. Increase your sales and streamline your process with features including e-commerce, inventory management, subscriptions, website builder, online payments, point of sale, and more. Trusted by thousands of farmers around the world, Local Line is the platform you need to take your farm to the next level. Subscriptions start as low as $49 a month, and Local Line never takes a percentage of your sales. Try Local Line today and receive a free premium feature for 1 year using our coupon code NOTILL. That's all caps, all one word, NOTILL. Today's episode is also brought to you by Farmhand. Tired of admin work and technology trouble? You need Farmhand on your team. Farmhand is the all-in-one software platform and virtual assistant built by and for independent farmers. Through a simple text or email to Farmhand, you can instantly offload admin tasks, automate your CSA, update your website, and sell more to your customers. With zero startup costs or long-term commitments, farmers are reporting an average of 6+ hours in time savings and 20% in sales growth each week. Learn more and take the quiz to see how much you can save by partnering with Farmhand at farmhand.partners/no-till. That's farmhand.partners/no-till. All right, enjoy the show.
Sarah Keiser, thank you so much for joining me today. I've been really looking forward to this conversation all week, and I wasn't going to let a little COVID get in the way of having this conversation with you. So thank you. It's great to have you on.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Awesome. Well, let's get straight into your story, because I think, behind every really awesome idea, there's a path, and usually not a very straightforward path to how a person gets to be doing what they're doing. So please give us the long version of your story.
I will absolutely try to do that.
Even though,
and feel free to interrupt me with questions, because I love the flow. And if I get off track or go a different direction, it's always nice to be getting questions and bring me back into my zone. But essentially, I grew up in the Midwest I think a lot of my Midwest roots kind of have a part of my work in building connection and trust with community, because I grew up in neighborhoods that innately had that. It's partly the Midwest, it's partly generational, it's a lot of things. A lot of neighborhoods without fences, a lot of neighbors that we just kind of took care of each other and walked around to school together and everything like that. Going a little off tangent, but we just went back to visit my family that still live in Iowa. And my 2 children came with me, who are 13 and 17. And they both, when we get back to California, said, the people in the Midwest are just so nice. So it's a different culture. We have lots of regional cultures within our very large country. So I come with that. I also come with a very, very deep attachment to life in general, to plants, to animals, to humanity. I was deeply connected in environmentalists and, pretty righteous and hardcore about it in my 20s, I would say, which I've grown to realize that doesn't benefit us in any way.
I can sympathize.
I've learned the approach that if I go into any sort of system or any sort of work I do with the belief that everybody there is doing their best, we are so much more productive in all of our transactions and all of our ways forward. If we come to the table with distrust and work with people who we don't believe or are not on our side and come with anger, we get nowhere. It just stops the progression. So believing that everybody's coming, doing their best, allows us to come to the table and collaborate and bring different views and different ways forward. Because a lot of my work and a lot of my goal and everything I do is to understand that we need all sides coming together. We need all the stories, all the inputs, everybody's life story, vision, goals, worldview has a value and needs to be listened to. And that's how we come to an approach. Once we start listening, we can come to an approach where we can work together for collaboration and a way forward. So again, off tangent. So I came with all this connection and I had this righteousness, which I grew out of. One thing that takes you away from that is children, because they kind of morph you into a whole different person and you realize that things are going to go the way they go once you have a baby. And it was a lovely thing. I have 2 children. But I moved to California in my late 20s, fell in love with California. I love Northern California. I fell in love with the oceans and the mountains and the rough weather and the beauty and the toughness of the people and the landscape and the pastoralism. It's just the connection, and my roots started to grow when I hit this land, and I just loved it. And I always knew I wanted to be on the land, to own land, to tend the land, and with kind of that environmentalist dualism and connection to animals being a part of that. When I learned about how animals are actually grazing ruminants specifically, but you can use a lot of different animals, can actually be incredible healing and building to a landscape that needs a lot of support. And so I finally, we landed on some property in Pengrove, California, Sonoma County. Love it here. Again, just feel so deeply connected to this landscape and the people. My children were 4 and 7, and we started walking around our neighborhood and getting to know everybody. Because as my children will tell you, I talk way too long to everyone. Again, I think that's the Midwest roots and genetics, And we just started to walk around. I got my first sheep. I got some dairy goats. So we started producing our own food and connected to them and their grazing. I started to go down the fiber rabbit hole. I'm deeply in love with protein fibers now, and that they're a solar product. Literally, the sun grows the grass that grows the fiber. What a brilliant regenerative way forward in our production system. And I wanted more sheep, and we have a pretty small property. And I was looking around, and a lot of my community are an aging population, and their properties were burdens that they had to manage. The landscape, the grass, the food that was a resource for my sheep was a burden for them because they didn't have the ability to manage it. Animals can be a lot of work and need a lot of tending. So I just started knocking on doors and connecting to people. And one goat got out, and I was on the road. A neighbor almost hit it. And then I met more people through that. So Miss Hazel was one of the people that actually connected us to some of our other neighbors. And I learned how to fence in a goat over the years, which is very hard.
So if you learned that, you almost don't need to learn anything else.
I'm sure some of my neighbors can attest. They've seen me out there throwing sticks and chasing them out of zones they're not supposed to be in to get the fences back up. But and then they just started being shared around the neighborhood. The Hooves started walking down the road. We had some new neighbors next door that were students at SSU that were so in love with the sheep that would come over to their property to graze and started helping us move down the road and tending them. And One of them put on their resume that they now are shepherding skills, which I do think helped them get a job. So there was this deep connection to each other and the humanities and the trust of me feeling that. So first we built trust and connection, then the animals came on, and then we built more through that aesthetic attention to the landscape, increased attachment to the land, attachment to the animals, and connecting all the tissues. Like the sheep were what wove the web, but the trusts were allowed the web to be woven. And so that spread into what became the Pengrove Grazing Project, which was the first concept of community grazing cooperatives. And it was originally started for rural residential communities. A lot of them are underserved communities, low-income communities. And what spawned it into becoming more than that, I began being grant funded by Globetrotters Foundation. So I would like to highlight that they jumped on this and were one of the first funders, as well as Fibershed was one of the first funders as well. And I was able to use that funding to go out and help rural residential communities build their own grazing cooperative, either by sharing animals that were already present or helping them start a new herd or FLIRD. FLIRD is a mix of sheep and goats. And with the grant, I also was able to be their ongoing support network for as long as they needed me. If something was going on, I was a phone call, a text away. We had all this connective tissue between the neighbors. We had neighbors that had lived next to each other for 20 years and never spoken. Then the sheep came, and now they were great friends, and they take care of each other, and they have community. They have systems in place for if there is a fire that comes through, they can get out safely because they all take care of each other. They have food systems, micro food systems in place because now everybody in that community gets a lamb in the freezer, has wool to be able to make products, and now is sharing the different crop systems that they grow in their backyard. So whoever has apples shares the apples. So neighborhoods have become micro food systems with just the sharing of the animals, primarily for vegetation management, but what turned into ecosystem services. And then this concept, as I kept driving around my beautiful county and the counties that surround me, and we were hit by really extraordinary fires, extraordinarily devastating fires, very terrifying moments year after year after year, was that we needed to scale it. And I would see, some of our lovely ranchers that are doing amazing grazing, and they would maybe be grazing 500 acres and a property next to them, a park next to that, which is 200 acres, and then 1,000 acres, is completely undermanaged, has tall annual vegetation. And the other part that I would like to talk about is that tall annual vegetation is an invasive non-native. So our annual grasses in Northern California were primarily brought through colonization for grain production. What the hills of California looked like, Northern California, before that was we had big clumping grasses with 25-foot root systems that stayed green, could manage fires, and didn't turn brown, and kept that annual carbon sequestration going year-round. So through different impacts and bringing in seed banks that outcompete, we've really changed the ecosystem of California. And then 100 plus years of fire suppression, we've done even more ecosystem changing, which is what's coming back is this massive amount of wildfires from untended lands. So how about, instead of having people who have large properties or the parks paying hundreds of thousands of dollars for weed whackers, let's bring in grazing as a component here. We can start out with contract grazers in the zones that need it, but then let's set up some infrastructure and let's open up the gate and the rancher next door can do the work. Let's create systems in which we are not having to seek annual funding to keep them alive and struggling year after year to do ecosystem stewardship when we have the capacity to do it through connection, trust, and opening gates. So that's what it's built into. And I'm now working with both of my county RCDs, the Sonoma and Goldridge County RCDs, Sonoma County RCDs, to help build out their Landsmart Grazing project, which is, I'm very, very impressed with the RCDs and their progressive thinking and their willingness to bring communities together and engage funding in a different way. And also working with Dr. Stephanie Larson of the UCC Extension, who received funding from our county funding. We received a big payout from PG&E from our 2017 fire that did some massive damage. And some of that funding was put out for us to over 2 years or 2.5 years to work on creating a countywide strategic, holistic grazing project in which we can have ongoing sustainable grazing through our animal production producers. So we're engaging our agricultural community to provide services, have land access, provide service, and then the people with the land, being public or private, get that service, rather than having to fund single applications of vegetation management and fund a rancher who is not able to feed his animals because he needs more land access when there's 1,000 acres right next door that needs grazing. We're starting to think about whole systems, and that ecosystems and fires do not stop at property lines. They do not stop at counties. So we need to look at whole regional ecosystems health for everyone to be served. All the communities, all the people, and our food producers, our agricultural community are going to be able to do that in a really sustainable way and provided real land access for that. That was a very long story, so I hope that.
No, it's the most beautiful story, and I have to say, I mean, how inspirational! And one of the biggest reasons, and I was telling you this offline before we started recording, that I wanted to reach out to you is that the more I think about the future state that would be better, not worse, that would feel better, not worse. It's easy to imagine how, physically how we would get there, how we would arrange the cropping systems and how we would use animal layers and how we would do, all of the straightforward. I don't think that we need more help with that. But what it always comes down to is the people and the fact that community and trust, as you say, really do have to come first. And what I love about how you've grown, this thing so organically is that you were able to, maybe, I don't even know if you knew how important it was, but it was just who you were and what you came from and like the value system, but that you shared that first and then everything else could build on that. So, I would love for you, whether it's through the lens of some of the projects that you've been talking about, you've already touched on how people are sharing food and opening their fences and all of that, but explore that a little bit more with some of the independent projects and especially this bigger thing that you're working on now. I think that we can't undervalue how critical that part of it needs to be, because I think we've gotten to this place where we think, I can have everything delivered straight to my door and I don't really need, I don't really love my neighbors. I can just kind of tell by the way they've painted their house or whatever. All of these constructs that we have now that we can live so isolated. Let's just, I want you to explore that more.
I'll try to dig into that. Yeah. Just in response to one of your statements, I had no idea that I was doing anything that had any relevance. I honestly still have trouble with the concept that I'm doing anything, because I get to work with amazing people. I get to see all the sides of the story. I get to be out on the land, walking and talking and connecting and in connection with people, the land and the animals. And so it's just a work of love and compassion and depth and support. And we do live in a culture currently that I feel like a lot of our decision making is based around fear or concern or scarcity when we live in a time of absolute abundance. So a lot of times for me, and when I go into these places and I open up this as an opportunity or offer this as an opportunity, and people are often like, how are we going to do this? And it's like, we just start doing it. Mm-hmm. So allow yourself to have faith in yourself and the person next door to just say, all we have to do is take one foot at a time and start doing it. Allow it to evolve. Begin to build. I feel like a lot of what we need to do as a community, as a culture, as a world, is begin to rebuild our faith in humanity. Humanity has a lot of beautiful things, but we focus on everything that's wrong with it rather than all the beauty and grace and kindness and warmth that can be enveloped in humanity. So coming back to that connection, believing that people producing our food are doing their best to produce our food, believing that if we want to make changes, we support the changes rather than bring a stick to enforce changes that when we don't understand the system. I've had the blessing with oh my gosh, I'm blanking the term of the project. Intersectional Land Stewardship Project. I apologize.
Oh, it's okay.
So we had the Intersectional Land Stewardship Project, which was a collaboration of 5 people: Rebecca Burgess, Nicole Warwick, Peter Nelson, and Clint McKay, in which we worked with the community grazing cooperatives. Several of them were cooperatives that their whole community burned in 2017. They rebuilt. They came back to their homes. Within 2 weeks of moving back into their home, another fire licked at their doors and they had to evacuate again. The fear and horror and PTSD that sits in all of them as they sit in this landscape that they have loved but they can no longer trust is really traumatizing. So bringing the hooves back onto the land for them, and one of them is called Herding Hope, empowered them with the ability to do their own land stewardship, their own land tending communally. So not one person was obligated to year-round care of these animals, but the whole community gets to share them, be served by them, and tend them. So you get to take vacations, you get to leave, because everybody's taking care of them. So I'm sure I'm going off on tangents, but beginning to build trust, even if you're not going to do a grazing cooperative, take a moment, go next door, like the old days, bake some brownies and bring them over to your neighbor, begin to believe that going for a walk around the neighborhood in the morning and saying hello to everybody you see is a good way forward. I feel like that's the first step. And that's hopefully what I bring the joy and the encouragement of trust. And then I help support ongoing. So the other key piece I think we need to remember, and that I really am hoping, and I'm really excited that the RCDs in my county I live in is flexible and willing to start seeing things differently, is that we can't just start something, get a little bit of funding, start something, check the box, we did it, and walk away. We have to have ongoing support and connection and resiliency through these projects. So some of the grazing cooperatives, like Hunter Lane Grazing Cooperative, that's been around going for probably 4 years now, I want to say, can mentor other grazing cooperatives. So we have neighborhoods now connecting to neighborhoods that take care of each other because the newbies are learning the animal husbandry curve. So just continuing to connect the dot and continuing to have that interwoven web of support is how we are going to create long-term sustainable change in any of our systems, be it cultural approaches to anything or land stewardship or climate resilient communities. And for climate resilient communities to be able to really state that, they need long-term ongoing support and viability. It cannot be a checkbox strategy for us to have any true change in any of our systems.
Amen. I mean, really, I can't even, one of the sort of disenchantments I had with working on public lands is how many restoration projects that I was a part of, designing, installing, whatever, and you get the funding for however many years. And then it's sort of like, okay, that's done. And they have no chance of holding up over time. I mean, we forget that every square inch of this vast landmass was culturally managed. It was part of a living human landscape where people were part of the ecosystem. And it's such a beautiful alternative to how we see ourselves as being sort of these overlords who, when we can afford to do some work over here. I mean, just so glad that you touched on that. And another part that I think we would be remiss if we didn't cover, and I know you'll want to talk about this, because I've observed in communities where there is a lot of polarity and a lot of assumptions being made about how certain people feel about other groups of people, and how land is often, a real trigger for getting people into their camps, that animals and that connection that that so many people just don't have, it gives people this opportunity to allow their boundaries to soften, because there's something so, I don't even know. There's something so special about connecting to animals and the accountability required and the compassion, because you're dealing with innocence, really, in its purest definition. So, yeah, I mean, please dive into that and what you've observed as having, that critical piece of how animals are kind of a connective tissue. I love how you use that language, because they bring out this better part of us.
That's a very good point. And I realized I got off tangent because I was going to talk about the intersectional land stewardship. So I'll do that after responding to this one. I went for a land walk with one of our more recent grazing cooperatives, which we were just needing to implement infrastructure. So I am a true believer that we need to fund infrastructure, and there's very little funding for infrastructure. I find it quite baffling, like financially, sustainability, fiscal solvency, how funders are willing to fund a single application of something. And anytime you're doing a single application of ecosystems, like a fire break, a prescribed, whatever it is, prescribed burn, even prescribed grazing, mastication, all the different things that may be funded. If you're doing a single application of that, you have to keep doing it forever. The things grow back. Vegetation is innately, thank goodness it grows back, because it is a beautiful resource on this landscape. We need to build the soil. We want our vegetation to come back and come back healthy and have a healthy ecosystem. But when we're funding single applications, we miss the point, because funding infrastructure, particularly for grazing, if there's water and some fencing, and we can do very wildlife friendly fencing, you have ongoing long-term ecosystem services and vegetation management and communities served in perpetuity, and a rancher who receives more land to be grazing their animals on for food production. So we did one out at this place. I got a little off tangent there, but we did one out at this place in West Sebastopol, and the RCDs were great because they funded the infrastructure so that the cows can keep moving through there. But on one of the preliminary land walks, I was walking with some of our great fire people, and I'm a true believer in prescribed burns. We live in a fire ecosystem. It is an amazing tool, and I would advocate for all the good tools to be on this landscape, including humans. And yes, I've worked with several Indigenous fire ecologists, and we need human tenders on this landscape. We are of this landscape. We are here to take care of it. Removing humans does not make anything better. We just need to do it well, and we can. So what I was talking to them, and they were talking with me about community grazing cooperatives, because they try to do a lot of community building to do like prescribed burns for whole neighborhoods, because again, ecosystems cross boundaries, and they wanted to do bigger burns and things. And like, we bring the communities together, but we can't keep them together. Like, how do you keep these going for so many years? And I'm like, I don't do what the sheep do. So that's the beauty of a grazing cooperative is, yes, the sheep, the hooves keep moving. The wool keeps growing. The lambs keep coming. It connects. It keeps that web woven because they need to be tended. Neighbors have to correspond with each other. It's like, even if you're not feeling well, you got to correspond and be like, yeah, it's time for the sheep to move. They've eaten everything, and people can come help you. Maybe you don't need to help it, but you're interacting, corresponding, co-tending, co-caring creates a connection in a community that will stay together in communication, working in collaboration together, feeding each other, because the animals are always there and always alive and always this breathing entity that breathes life back into that connection. So the shared flock where they get to pass around brings people in, brings community together, and keeps them together long term. And so we need to think about that is missing in a culture that has outgrown the human system of small communities living and being interdependent upon each other. The grazing cooperatives become interdependent upon each other again in a really beautiful way, because the animals bind them in that way, but with love rather than a burden,
right.
So the animals are really critical. And some communities even do dairy goats, and they pass them around, and everybody has goat milk, and and they get to make cheese, and they're just like diving into these systems that they never knew they would be a part of, diving into animal agriculture. The other thing that I think is so beautiful about it is it ingratiates our communities that have had no real connection with agriculture into understanding what it takes to produce our food. So what it takes to feed the goats, milk the goats, like what it takes to get the half a gallon of milk. And then the breeding year round and the breaks in the system and why the goats don't produce milk year round and meat isn't available year round. And how do we look at whole systems and what's the right impact on the land? And I was just talking to one of the cooperative members, who's a friend, and I become friends with pretty much all of them because they're all delightful people. But she was like thinking about a chicken. She was like raising chickens for eggs. And then she was thinking about raising a few for meat for her family. And she's like, and then I go to Costco and I see $3 rotisserie chickens at Costco. When she's like, it costs me $3 to buy one chick.
Mm-hmm.
Then I have to raise the chick, slaughter the chick, process it. And that's cost me to do my own at least $40.
Mm-hmm.
So how is this food system working? And it's like the cog in the wheels. You're in touch with it. How are our food producers able to produce food and stay alive when this is what we're paying for food? Because it doesn't seem realistic.
Totally. Such a good point.
Connection is really critical too. How do we reconnect? Because we've moved away from agriculture being right next door or just outside of our neighborhood community, or people, having a few chickens in the backyard, understand what it takes to feed them and raise them, and they don't lay every single day. Like just the nuances of all those products. And so it provides more broader community understanding of what local food systems look like and what it takes for that to be viable.
Yes, such a great point. I really love I really love that you brought that up because I do think that it is, part of community building is this empathy that we really lack. We think that, um, as you alluded to earlier, the sort of righteousness that comes with, being an environmentalist or being, in some other quote unquote camp, that we've drawn these really really tall border. It's like we just don't see each other anymore. We just scream.
Yep.
We just shout our diatribes from the other side of the wall or whatever. But that you touch what somebody else is trying to make a living doing, for even a little bit of your day, and all of a sudden you have this new appreciation and gratitude and an ability to imagine having a dinner with that person, a real and a desire to understand what they've gone through. And I think that the same is true on the other side, having a connection, for a big landowner to have a connection to a local community and start to think about, what if I could not be tied to this commodity system? What if I only sold my food here? What would that look like, and how would we make that happen? You're right. It's just the substrate for being more thoughtful is so rich. So I would love it if you could talk a little bit, and you have so many projects, and I want you to talk as deeply about them as you can, in the within the boundaries of how much time you have to spend with me. But one of the big questions I have is, what does that development of infrastructure look like? Because I can imagine, and what I hope is that this is going to be substrate for a lot of people out there to be thinking about, how could this work where I live? What could this look like where I live? And you are so right about the infrastructure piece needing to be really thought through. So can you talk about what that process has looked like for you working with the RCD? And just so everybody knows, rural conservation districts are sort of the arm, the active application arm of the NRCS in California. Everybody has, every state has some version of an RCD. It's service oriented. There's people on the ground. Take it away.
Yeah. Thanks for clarifying RCDs. I do forget that
not everybody lives in California.
Not everybody knows what it is, right? And I live in California. But and that they were created after the Dust Bowl when we wanted to begin doing land stewardship differently. We need to start improving it. And they're there to be a resource and a way to support transitions into different or better or different types of land stewardship. So for me, being in a fire ecosystem and being on a landscape that historically was heavily pastoral, have lots of grazing, and became, as this land base in Sonoma County became more of a commodity and the land began to cost more, very few people could hold on to their land. We have a lot of urbanites coming up and for 20, 30 years, buying up what was typically animal agriculture land, ranchers, grazing, things like this. And before prescribed burns were outlawed, we had the indigenous people doing prescribed burns and they didn't have their own livestock, obviously, but they would use wild herds to do different management. They would push them. Like you said, they were master land stewards. And the food production they had in this system allowed them to have much higher populations than anywhere else in the country, because they were just master at understanding their environment and how to create a really healthy, robust food system within this landscape. So understanding that animals have been used a long time for vegetation management, prescribed burns. But then as we changed out of agrarian, because it was no longer financially viable, we had a lot of brush encroachment. We have a lot of coyote brush. And then when we took fire off the land, we had a lot of Doug fir encroachment. We just kind of really, over the past 120 years, transformed this landscape away from what it was, when I would call it a healthy fire ecosystem. And a part of that was when we had people going on to landscapes, there also was the environmental movement that the best thing you can do for the environment is get people off that landscape. Get people or anything people like off that landscape, remove the fences, let the animals go free, without understanding that this land was beautifully tended by human beings for 11,000, 12,000 years, beautifully tended. Has been no longer grazed, that has encroachment, and that probably doesn't really have fencing or water infrastructure. So the other thing about good grazing that I'm looking at is for it to be an ecosystem process as well. So how do we get the right animals on the right amount of land for the right amount of time, and then move them off so that land gets rest? How do we time it so we begin to reduce our invasive non-native annuals and start to increase our clumping grass? How do we start to bring that system back through our grazing? And the way to do that is have fencing infrastructure and water infrastructure so the animals can be moved and rested. So they're not having to come back all the way across 500 acres to get to their water trough, because then we're not able to steward that land appropriately. In a lot of the rural, higher end rural residential communities, rural ranches, and once they were turned into rural residential communities, they removed all the fences. So for us, if we can fund infrastructure, and a lot of them are right next to a ranch, let's get some cattle fencing in there. Let's get some water infrastructure. Let that rancher bring the cows back on and start to manage that landscape. With the infrastructure, it can be done in perpetuity. So I think that's critical, water and fencing infrastructure for grazing. But if we want to go a little deeper in infrastructure, and if we're looking at food system infrastructure, we need all the pieces of our food system to be regionally held, regionally appropriate, regionally viable, financially viable. Because what happened was we took our agriculture and expanded it into like having 3 slaughterhouses, in 3 states, and animals are we're looking at systems. We're blaming our food producers for having systems that we don't think is healthy. But yet we don't understand that they're within a system that they don't have control over. So nobody wants to ship their cows 13 hours to a slaughterhouse. They want to take them 30 minutes locally and have it done quickly and ethically and sanely, and provide food to their community. But those systems are in place, and those systems are very hard to create, because right now, due to our lack of trust, we have lots of heavy regulation that supports big, huge systems, big, huge facilities. And because there is no trust and there's no communal connection to the system. So I feel like we want regulation. We feel we have a community that believes in a cultural approach that we believes regulation is how we keep things safe and healthy, where I think regulation is how we support big infrastructure and systems. The way we keep things clean and healthy and appropriate is by community connection to your food producers. Go visit the farms, see their approach, stay connected, buy food from them, directly from them, support regional systems, be a part of that support system so that your food stays local, and that most of the money goes back into your local economics, and your food producers are making most of the money rather than all the different streams of our current food production, where farmers of any kind, crop, whatever you're eating is getting like 10% of what you're buying in the grocery store. And that's not viable. That's not really, that's a system that says, we want cheap food no matter what it takes. We will we will do whatever you need to do to get us cheap food. So, take what you can from the land, grow grains all over and ship it, like keep that food safe. But then we want policy that says you're practicing bad agriculture. You need to do it differently and enforce that they're not doing it well. So we don't want to pay for it culturally in the store. So what we need to understand, and I think the way forward is a deeper connection to what it takes to produce food. And I also think people will be happier and more filled with joy and feel more connection if they get that, if they get to experience that connection and build community rather than building regulation and enforcement.
Absolutely. I mean, and I also think that the income stratification around food and how some of the people who need to be fed medicine the most are the least able to afford the healthiest food. And if you're working at the community level and all the stakeholders are involved, it's not, you only have a seat at this table if you are, earning six figures or more. Right. You are a valued member of this community. You are helping us take care of this food. It's just such a beautiful idea of where we could go. And it's not to say it's just super simple and straightforward. It's a lot of work to build community. So, do you want to talk about, just take one of your projects and talk about what that process looks like, especially because it seems like, I know about Fiber Shed, and there's quite a few examples of things kind of like this in California, but there's a lot of space in this country for doing things like this, but it takes some leadership. It takes some serious commitment from different individuals. So I would love for you to just speak to, when you're starting one of these new projects, what does that process look like for you?
One thing I'd love to start with is that from my experience, the only way to make true change is to start at home and next door. Like, the only thing you do is get to know your neighbor, you've succeeded. Like, that's the goal. Like, it doesn't have to be big. It's like, get to know your neighbor, build a relationship there, have that support network of that community right next door. Begin to serve each other when you are sick or your kid's sick, or, I do realize we live in a culture where we want big. We look at national politics, not local politics. We think we got to change the world, where in my experience, the only real change is when I'm taking care of the person next door, when I'm walking down the street and making sure my neighbor who got his shoulder replaced is home from the hospital and has a meal that day. And, so if you want to start to make any real change, it's trying not to pay so much attention to the news on the TV, the national news, the federal news, the international, because there's a lot. And I'm not saying don't pay attention. I'm just saying reduce that input and go out and start talking to the people around you. Things a little bit different. Be willing to slow down. I really do believe we have to slow down culturally to be able to really see any different approach. And that's one thing I learned from working with the Indigenous fire ecologist, Clinton McKay. One of the things I learned many, it was a really amazing experience, was we as in the white folk, or our culture or whatever, like, we need to slow down and listen a little bit more. It was like, it's so valuable to slow down, to take your time, to know that no matter what's going on, I have 15 minutes to stop and talk to John down the street if he wants to talk. If we slow down and we take those conversations, we get to start to see a holistic thing rather than being stuck in the grind of, this is what I have to do because it's the way I know forward. And a lot of times when I go to these communities, I have one person reach out and they're like, we don't know what to do. I heard about you. I'm afraid living on this land. Fires scare me. I don't know what to do. So we get stuck. And all I'm really doing is coming in saying, it's okay. The way you're feeling is okay. This is natural. But now we're going to start taking forward, even though we don't know where we're going. And we're going to go over and talk to a neighbor. And we're going to bring in some animals, even though you don't know about how to take care of animals, because if it doesn't work, that's okay too. We'll find another home for the animals. So being willing to move forward in trust and connection, being willing to stop and take conversations whenever they are present, being willing to start projects knowing that they may not work out, and that's okay. Like, it can fail, and that's okay. Every single cooperative has fluxed and gone in and out, and community members have joined and others have maybe not. And it's changed and fluxed. It's a breathing system. And that's what we need to think about our ways forward. And if we want to look at terminology like nature-based solutions, they aren't linear, they're holistic, they're nuanced, and they're flowing. It's okay if it doesn't work out. It's okay if something bad happens. It's okay. Just lean on your community and keep moving forward. Like, allowing failure, I think, is really critical. And I fail all the time. If anybody wants to ask about my failures, feel free.
Me too.
Yes.
I volunteer all of my
I'm
failures.
like, oh, that didn't go well at all.
Yeah.
I'm like, learning my lesson, but just let it not go well. Take it in and think about how maybe it could be different. Be willing to take that critique and positive criticism and think about, and that's how we learn. And that's a safe and kind way to move forward. But you have to believe in yourself and trust in your ability to fail and keep going.
Today's episode of the No-Till Market Garden podcast is brought to you by Harnois Greenhouses. For more than 55 years, Harnois Greenhouses has led the way in controlled environment agriculture innovation, partnering with market gardeners and farmers across North America to deliver comprehensive commercial greenhouse solutions. Their mission is clear and steadfast: to pioneer a greener, more resilient future for agriculture. At the heart of their success is a commitment to their community of producers with extensive expertise in design, manufacturing, and installation. Harnois Greenhouses provides the best greenhouse solutions to the grower across North America. Their greenhouses are engineered to face any North American climate, ensuring unparalleled brightness, agronomic performance, faster return on investment, and lasting durability. They're not just building greenhouses, they're creating energy-efficient ecosystems that promote sustainable and profitable agricultural practices. With over 20,000 projects to their name, they're more than a manufacturer, they're a partner. For the initial design to the final installation, Harnois Greenhouses is with you at every step, guaranteeing the success of your venture. Harnois Greenhouses, leader in turnkey solutions for local growers. All right, back to the show.
You have to believe that you're capable of overcoming failure, which, I think is a pretty significant boundary for some people.
I think it is.
But I think...
it's hard and it's scary. And what it is it's scary. If I fail, what does it mean? It doesn't have to be big. You can let it be just what it is.
Yeah, it's a feedback loop. This is your opportunity to try another way. I mean, I think one of the things that you said that, just to put it in different words, is we should give ourselves the gift of experimenting outside of this system that we know is really not serving us. It's not serving anyone. And so much of especially in the West, but this is going to be true anywhere because climate impacts, aggressive and violent climate impacts are hitting everywhere. And that fear, I talk about it all the time with farmers in my area, and I know you do, where it doesn't feel like it used to feel. It feels terrifying to go into the growing season now because we know what is at stake. And there's something so beautiful and powerful when you finally have given yourself the agency to try something that would actually make a difference in what your next growing season feels like, that it's worth however many neighbors you got to talk to, because they're not all going to talk to you, and that's fine. But like you say, let's just start creating some feedback loops. Let's try that instead of just sending lines out into space that never come back. Let's get some answers to some questions that we haven't even allowed ourselves to ask.
I love how you stated it. That was beautifully said. And I agree with all of those pieces. Yeah. It's a critical piece.
Yeah. We're not going to figure this out in one day. And if we thought we did.
Yeah. And there is something empowering that once you do that once and you see yourself go through it, you're like, oh, okay. Like, you have to kind of get through that hump once. And that's why community, having humans in your life that you can trust and can hold your hand, is critical. Because if there's no way I could do any of this alone, I do this in collaboration with, the RCDs, my neighborhood, a plethora of grazing cooperatives. The city of Petaluma has started a grazing project for healthy fire ecosystems and carbon sequestration. Like people, and it is about holding each other's hands as you make the leap.
Yeah.
But make the leap, try that, because yes, we are caught in this loop. We need to break the cycle that this isn't the only way forward, that this cycle, this disconnect isn't someplace that is safer. And we've convinced ourselves it's safer in this place, and it's not. But you need someone's hand to hold as you step outside, because you're working outside of a system that is telling you actively it's not safe to be outside this system.
Yep.
But the system creates disconnect and large systems in which you don't really have connection. It is outside of it in which you find your connection and your safety zones and your ability to move forward within community and take those risks. And they're not unsafe risks. I just mean take a step forward in a different direction and see. And that's how we're going to find different solutions. And by coming together and understanding it's not going to be perfect, it might be a little messy, but it's in the movement forward together that we find the answer.
One of the things that I've been really struck by in just reading about your projects and reading about your story is how, just reflecting on what it makes me think about is this idea that, the inputs right now for most people are so externalized and so disconnected from, your personal day to day, but it's like all of our, 90, whatever's not coming from your direct nuclear family is coming from some externalized source. And there is I think when we're left to ourselves to put the guardrails on what is safe and unsafe, the pain that we know is somehow less terrifying than the pain we don't know. And when we can start to create safe people in our own, who know what our day-to-day looks like, when your inputs start to come more from the people in your neighborhood. I just think of Mr. Rogers and how wonderful, we should just start watching Mr. Rogers again. Anyway, but you give yourself that, because we're all going to judge ourselves very harshly, and we're going to put up boundaries that are going to keep us from doing something that we would have to judge ourselves very harshly about. But when somebody says, I want to try this thing with you, and maybe it's going to be a train wreck, but at least then we can build a better engine or whatever that looks like. And I think that your work really makes that doesn't just make it possible, but makes it kind of tangible in this real, sort of soft, fleecy. It's got all the components. I get so excited about it, but it's not hyperbole.
Personally, I love your description of it. And that's, I believe that's how it should be. It should be soft and beautiful. Like I said, we live in a system that says you're broken and unwhole, where if you can step outside of it, you see you're whole and beautiful, and this is the world, and we can move forward. And there are so many different beautiful ways forward. We live on a resilient climate. We live on a resilient, world. We live in super resilient communities. We have these amazing animals that know how to tend the land, that are the best solar creatures on the planet, that take cellulose that is so hard to digest, and they turn it into fiber and food and milk, and feed us by processing the systems that we are unable to process, and nourish the landscape and nourish communities. It's like that deeply embedded connection and that feeling of whole. And the other thing that I think that the animals do for people is it gets you outside. Go outside, take your shoes off, walk around barefoot in the dirt once a day, everybody. Just try it. Get in the dirt and go out and, we have lambs right now, and the whole neighborhood gets to come out with a cup of coffee and watch the lambs run around.
Mm-hmm.
There is something very joyful in that you wouldn't get out and do if there wasn't baby lambs.
Totally.
So, and the other thing is there's the beauty of lambs, and then there is also the understanding that in new life there's death, and it brings us and our communities back to that system of understanding there's life and there's death. And death is a natural part, and we are going to witness it, and we're going to be a part of death. And I think that gives us the resiliency also to go out and say, I'm going to take some risks because I've seen life and I've seen death, and I know it's all part of a system. It's not scary. It's all within our systems and what we know deeply embedded in us. And that's another piece that brings us back to that connection that we've separated from and isolating agriculture and isolating the systems that feed us because we don't have any awareness or not direct input on what that is and what it takes and all the pieces. So it demonstrates the resiliency of life and the beauty that comes with new life and the real beauty that comes with death. It is a part of a natural system. And you see how, animals dying will feed the trees and the trees will shade the animals. And this beautiful system that has been around forever that is so intended to work in a really beautiful symbiotic way. And that we're pieces of a whole system. We don't have to live in that fear of a scary world because we're all just a piece of a beautiful system.
Yeah.
And that's what I think grazing cooperatives and animals and that connection, it brings us back to how deeply we as humans are connected. We are not separate from this. We are a part of this.
And I really think that one of the millions of benefits that we've already covered today, but that piece about death and who out there doesn't fixate on death at one or many times in their lives. And I think one of the greatest gifts of being a land steward, especially one who works with animals, is that we get to experience the honor and the privilege of dying on a daily basis and not remove ourselves from it, because there's such a danger in being removed from death. And it's not just animals and it's not just humans. There are sacrifices required for that, for the loop to continue. Because if we just let energy expire without that covenant of death, there can be no perpetuity, right? And so when we separate ourselves from that, I think we've facilitated that belief that technology holds all the answers, when really, there will not be a driving force without death. And it is an honor. And we are responsible for cultivating, in as much as we can, the most honorable version of how we feed ourselves. And the return of honor culture is, again, so closely tied to communities and how we show up for each other and how we find our accountability again. And I think that when people get to work with animals who have never, or maybe for personal reasons, have thought that they need to not be connected to that that part of the food system, it's a real, it kind of changes the game for them.
Yeah.
No question. So I
agree. Yeah.
You have, you have all these projects, and then Wild Oat Hollow is your home, right? That's your home farm. Do you have your own herd? Is that part of the grazing cooperative in your neighborhood now? What does that look like? What's your day to day?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, so Wild Oat Hollow is the family farm, and yes, we have our herd of fiber sheep that is both for fiber and meat, and we have dairy goats, and they're also part of the Pengrove Grazing Project. So they go out and graze with whomever wants them and needs them and wants to share them. We have, over the years, turned them into quite the friendly flock. So almost all of them run up and get petted by any neighbor that wants to pet them. We've kind of turned them into monstrosities, but they serve the purpose of here. I also really, truly believe in breeding systems of breeding quality animals, making good culling choices. They all have really good feet, good fiber, good minds, good mothers, good udder attachment, good legs. sound minds and healthy, robust animals. So I believe if you're practicing any sort of animal husbandry, you need to make really sound breeding choices and make really sound culling choices. That's part of your obligation in that work. And so lots of times my animals, some of the lambs do go into meat production, but a lot of them will go out be sold into new grazing cooperatives because they're trained to portable electric fencing. They know how to follow a lead person. They're easy to manage. They're quality, healthy animals that are going to be easy to manage and not have a lot of health problems. I will tell anybody who wants to start with livestock, there's no such thing as a free sheep. The few people who've gotten free sheep cost you way more money, way more problems, way more headaches, because it's not the way forward. Get good quality animals to start from and make very good breeding decisions. I think that is so critical in all of our work. So there's that. I also have friends, again, more community with larger landscapes, and I run several steer every year that are sold for meat. We harvest them usually every summer after they've eaten the seed heads and the dry browse down, and then we add more steer onto that. So I have steer, and I do have meat production, and I have fiber production. And the dairy is mostly for the family. We did have, just up until recently, because I had too many things that I was running and working in projects, had a skincare product line. I'm trying to exactly know how you'd call it. It was climate beneficial skincare. And what I saw was all over my county, tons and tons and tons of animal fat being thrown in the garbage. It drove me crazy. This beautiful product being thrown into the garbage. And I had goat milk. So I started to make animal fat goat milk soap. And then a really nice cream as well that was made from goat ghee. So we still use animal products in that, and all from ingredients from my local county. So we have local hydrosol, local beeswax, local ghee, and local olive oil. And so I was handed that off to Natalia Bertati, who still is running it, and you could still get the soap on her website, which is Poppy Pie Farm.
Poppy Pie.
So it was handed off, Poppy Pie Farm, and it was handed off to her, and she got some sheep and is starting her own grazing project at her place, and is an herbalist, and took that over so we can keep gleaning all this fat. Whoever has extra animal fat, reach out to her. Instead of it going into the garbage or you having to pay to dispose of it, that product is being turned into a really beautiful soap made locally in hand batches by Natalia herself. And what we're also trying to do is highlight that soaps made from palm oil and coconut butter and shea butter are not a sustainable way forward. And I know that I have several friends that are deeply vegetarian. They can't eat animal products, and that I feel everybody should eat what feels appropriate to you. I am not telling anybody what to eat, but I've talked all of them into using my soap because no animals killed for that fat. We're taking a product that would gone into the garbage, and we're making sure that we're not shipping products all the way across the ocean, and we're not purchasing products that could be causing massive devastation and massive death to other parts of our world that we don't have to see. It is not better. It is not better for our ecosystems to be buying products from far away than local animal products that are raised really well and sustainable. So I think we need to, again, and that's part of it, is take a look back. Like, if we're trying to not use animal products, and again, everybody please do what feels right to you. But if you're not using animal products because you don't want them to die or you think that they're bad for the environment, if you're buying shea butter or palm oil, you're not benefiting the environment. You're not helping anything. It would be far better to be finding sustainable local systems and staying with that for ecosystems and the humane life of animals and people and everybody else. So, like, we have to look at the whole system. Because it's outside of our purview doesn't make it better.
And I mean, it's so locked into who you are, but I just want to point to the fact that you yourself identified, yeah, I could have one more income stream if I continue to, stretch myself as thin as possible and make this extra product. But you had already done the hard work of knowing who's in your community and who would be able to not just do that, but be able to really do it and take advantage of a waste stream and provide this amazing benefit. So instead of just closing up shop, you hand it off to somebody else. And I think, again, if you didn't take the time and you hadn't been who you are and built that community first, it's a beautiful thing regardless that you have a concept in your own mind of what is enough for you, and you don't need to do everything, and you don't need to make everything and make as much money as you possibly can, but that there are gifts that your community can benefit from just from having that fabric of humans who are excited about all the ways that you can take advantage of just where you are and the abundance of that place. And I think everything that you just said was so important. So thank you for that.
And I will say also, like, the beauty of handing it off to Natalia, first of all, she's just lovely. Again, a great community person, just a lovely person. And her daughter's young, so she's at home, more, and she's an artist. So what I love is she's taken this idea and she's beautify it in such a way that I could have never done, because I just don't have that artist eye that she has. And these soaps now, she's putting like little bits of cedar in them and they are stunning. And I'm like, that is beautiful. I love when you can make an idea, again, generosity begets generosity, and allowing for the flow of, whatever we want to call it, the flow of abundance, or I don't want to be too hippy dippy for anyone else there. It's not really my way, but by handing it off to her, I got to see the product improve and be beautified in a way that I could have never done it. And I'm so enjoying watching that path happen. And she's just making amazing soap. So I hope everyone can try it. And the great thing about that kind of soap, it's super kind on your skin. It lathers nicely. It's a shampoo bar, so you can get rid of single-use plastics in your bathroom. So there's a lot of ways forward. Again, just look, try to look a little differently. Like, what is being thrown away? Where's where's that stream that you can kind of find your niche and take it over?
Totally. So just to kind of rewind a little bit, because there's an important part that you were talking about the animal husbandry, and holistic management is it's a life's work. The working on getting the genetics right, understanding when, getting connected to animals is not something you do in a minute. And I think people are going to be really enthusiastic. They're going to hear this story and they're going to think it's amazing, because you'd have to be really daft to not see all the beauty here. But I would love for you to talk a little bit about, in a future world where people are starting more of these things, do you identify someone? Do you put someone in place who is going to make sure that the animals are being moved properly? Because, your community can form all these connections. How does that actually end up working? And how do you get the animal piece right, so that not only are they being managed so that they are actually healing and contributing ecologically, being used as an ecological management tool, but then also, doing that hard work of getting the genetics right over generations? It's a lot, there's a lot there.
It's nuanced. I find with most grazing cooperatives that have their own flock, first of all, one of my things is to always be accessible with questions. I'm pretty much always accessible. Even if people are out of state, call me. I'm here to chat about these things. But I find with the most grazing cooperatives, there tends to just be someone who kind of is the coordinator, the mentor, whatever you want to call it, who kind of takes over a little bit more of the, like, okay, it's time for the sheep to move, or where can we put them, or we have a huge rainstorm going, who's got the highest ground, who has the best barn, like understanding that there is no perfect world. And even though, yes, maybe Jim Bob's grass needs to be grazed, but he has no shelter and we have 5 inches of rain, we're going to go ahead and keep the sheep in the shelter and move them afterwards. And like understanding as a community the best way to do that. They're always welcome to ask me if they have questions about, when should we shear? When are we lambing? Should we lamb? When do we put the ram in? Where do we get rams? So-and-so's limping, somebody's sick, check their temperature. All grazing cooperative, I give them a whole kind of Google Drive of emergency kit list. I recommend a sheep goat health thing that talks about what's the average temperature, like basics of animal husbandry, So they have kind of their own toolkit and a kind of agreement amongst them. And usually I'm also helping them find if they're bringing in a breeding male, I'm helping them find a quality breeding male with a really good mind on them. Because another thing I always tell people, your breeding males are really critical because they're going to make the most changes on your animal because you have one male to however many females. And they have to have a good mind. If you have a dangerous breeding male, you are going to have really hard to manage lambs or baby goats or roosters, whatever your breeding male is. They can do their job and not be dangerous. So don't keep dangerous animals around. It's not a good idea. Keep a good mind on your animals. We've been breeding them for a long time. We can breed quality breeding males that aren't dangerous. And be kind to yourself. Understand things are going to go wrong. Understand that death is going to be at your door. There's people that have put them. I try to send a toxic plant list, but sometimes they're missed. Some sheep went into a field that had oleander. They didn't know that was toxic, and like three of their 9 sheep ate it. The other 6 didn't and died very quickly. Oleander will kill things in a moment. Mm-hmm. And you walk out and you're like, oh, this is oleander. We didn't know. Forgive yourself. No, it was not intentional, and know that won't happen again. And you're aware of toxic plants, and you're aware of what your sheep will eat. Yeah. That community that had that happen actually feels like at this point it was like a good call because that was their 3 craziest sheep that ate the oleander. So sometimes the sheep help you out by making their own decisions. So be patient, be kind. Animal husbandry is a sharp curve. Things will go wrong. Most likely you'll have losses, and just measure them. Allow yourself time to grieve or manage whatever happened, and then move on knowing that it's not your fault and there's no guilt. It's just part of the process of learning.
Yeah. Yeah. And part of, firming up that relationship, I think, So,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And understanding the cycle of events,
Yes.
Death is inevitable.
And one of the things that I think is a great opportunity here is that as people get more connected to animals, they might think, I have a little extra time in the evenings. Maybe I'll take that online holistic management course, or maybe I'll, find somebody that can mentor me or whatever. And we don't learn it without teachers. And I think it just opens the door to people thinking, you know what? I could figure this out, or I could be a part of this. And that's really cool. So we've talked broadly, we've talked in a very granular way about who you are, what you're doing. And now that you've come as far as you have, what do you see on the horizon for yourself? What's the next, what's next for you? Or do you just do you love it how it is? What is your future state?
Yeah, that is a great question. When you asked it, I honestly had to say I have no idea.
It's a great answer.
I will say that, for me, on the horizon is continuing to be able to do this work. I'm always open to new projects and new visions and new people and new connections, and knowing that I'm on a road that is very flexing, and, I have to remind myself too, that I can be comfortable outside of the system, because the system still wants to pull me back in. We're just nuanced into it, so understanding that there's, I have moments of discomfort in which I know I'm doing the right work, but I don't know where it's going. And, the income stream can be flexible, and I'm a single mom with 2 kids. So I have to find a comfort in that place. And just knowing that I feel very blessed to live in a county and be engaged with the RCDs and the UC extension and the county through their funding, and have cities like the city of Petaluma, which hired me to help build out their grazing program. And just knowing that this work, this vision, this collaboration is what people are looking for, and just know that I need to keep moving forward and being willing to step into whatever place is open to me. That's what I think is the way forward, because I really didn't even know I would be here 2 years ago. I would not have been able to tell you that this is where I would be. So I live in the constant, I'm very comfortable with a lot of unknowns, and a little bit of chaos and a whole lot of joy in my work. And all of those things come together beautifully if I let them.
So I I had these last night when I was, thinking about all the things that I didn't want to forget to talk with you about, ask you about. This is the Market Garden podcast. And one of the things that I run across all the time is people who are doing, intensive vegetable production. A lot of times these are, our listeners, it's the No-Till Growers podcast. So they've really figured things out, in a sort of new systemic way to produce food without some of the historical terrible baggage that, so these are innovative folks, but a lot of them know that that it would be a beautiful thing to bring animals into their systems, but that level of commitment and infrastructure is just a little bit more than what they can do. And so I was imagining that there will be people out there who hear what you've done and think, I could start a grazing cooperative that works with intensive vegetable production and bring that animal layer in for nutrient cycling. And, have you worked with any, you want to?
Yeah. And I really appreciate you bringing that up, because I think bringing animals into crop production is going to make a huge difference for people in the soil, in your production. So, but I also want to be very clear that I know that most farmers are already completely overworked.
Yeah.
So adding another element is hard. So in my dream, we create a collaboration, and I actually have a client here called Luma Farms. And I can go on a couple different tangents, but Luma Farms is a cannabis farm here in Sonoma County. It's one of our family cannabis farms, small. It's not a large one. They are super soil geeks. They are building the soil. Everything's organic. You should see how much love and attention they put in the soil. But regulations in our county is you can only grow an acre of cannabis on 15 acres of land. So they had all this other land that needed to be tended. We've gotten sheep on the land to do some of their vegetation management. It's already done massive improvement on the land. They're seeing all different seed banks coming up. They're seeing mushrooms. We're seeing the land just breathing back to life rather than being mowed short when the grass gets this tall, because it's expensive to mow. So they're watching, and they want to be able to provide land access to a crop farmer for food production. Their limitation is water use right now. But how do we create systems? And I think of our crop producers that need animal impact. And so Luma Farms is one in which we're working on that. But how do we cross the water boundary? How do we identify that what they're trying to do is create a food hub with sheep, crops, cannabis, organic, supporting, feeding their local community? They aren't at odds. They want to provide the land, and they would be a support metric. So if the crop farmer's gone and they're like, oh my God, did I turn my water off? Oh my God, did I shut the greenhouse? Or, whatever. There's people there that can go out there and check on those things or help with that system, so you're not killing yourself to do the work. And when we have collaborations, it gives us a little bit more freedom to do that. So I would hope that with crop production, depending upon the size of their thing, if we can find a contract grazer or somebody who is out grazing, form a collaboration, and maybe if we can time it, that maybe those animals can come in when there's a break in contract grazing and clean up some of their crops for however long they need them, and then go off into another contract graze. So you're creating a collaboration. It's a land base for that contract grazer, so they're not stuck without a place to put their animals. And those animals are doing regenerative work onto that crop production, and nobody's killing themselves to do it. I was really blessed to go down with several other people, Stephanie Wilkes and Paige Lynn Trotter, and it was one of the projects funded by Fibershed at Rancho Las Palmas, a crop production farm in Davenport. Are you familiar with them? Oh my God, I love them. We had a great time. So they brought sheep in, and they've seen to their crop production. They're pretty big. And one thing I will say is sometimes when you just start something and know nothing, you actually make choices that are really cool, because no one would have thought of that if they knew more. So the fact that you know nothing, you actually kind of start things in a really cool way. Like, it doesn't always go beautifully, but they had gotten a bunch of sheep, and they rotated them in after crop production, and they were able to do it because of their crops. It's like artichoke and tall layered crops, because also with organic vegetable, you have to be careful about manure coming in. There's a lot of nuances. So everybody has to work within their own system. And I know that there's a lot of limitations. So please know, to everyone out there listening, that I understand that there are nuances, that some of these things may not work, but sometimes we can think outside of that system and find a way. Anyway, so they're able to do it really well. They've seen their yield go up, their production size go up. I mean, they've seen huge benefits with the sheep going on and doing cleanup, and they're only they grow a little bit of alfalfa too. So they have alfalfa feed for additional food when they need it, but those sheep are thriving on crop production cleanup, which is crazy.
Well,
they
it's
did
such
at
a
some point, I think,
co-benefit.
bring in some fiber sheep, and so they just, they're trying to figure out what to do. They had some with bad feet, some with good feet. Some had some fiber in. They had last winter that it rained. It just rained and rained. I mean, we just got rain and rain. They lost a lot of lambs because they didn't understand that maybe you put the rams in at a time. So maybe because they don't have a lot of shelter, that they lamb in March. Mm-hmm. So we had a whole instructional. We all went down there. Paige Lynn brought her corral system. We brought 8 or 10 new shears, and Stephanie Wilkes worked with them. We wormed them. We gave them shots with the whole family. The whole family at Rancho Las Palmas helped us. We went over there. The 2 men that managed the herd are Spanish only speaking, and I'm English only speaking, which is something I need to work on, I know. But we had a lot of translators, and we had a beautiful conversation. We learned about health, hoof trimming, what sheep to cull and why. Like, if you have ones that have bad feet, just those are the ones you eat. Yeah. If you have, don't bring any more fiber sheep in, because you don't want to shear. Your hair sheep are doing beautifully. They're refined to be doing this work. What sheep are doing well and keeping their body mass on the food, and what sheep you should call because they're not thriving, making good breeding decisions. They hadn't, I don't think they'd ever, hadn't been doing like worming or any veterinary care. So we showed them just a system in place to do all that. And we did all of their sheep in one day between all of us. Wow. And they made us this beautiful lunch. And it was a brilliant, beautiful day of collaboration, vision, support, and how do we help them in this way forward, where they've created a model that is doing very well. All they need is a few pieces to help them in that modeling. And we were able to provide some really fun, exciting support and build up some new of our sheep shearers that can go out and now have more experience under their belt.
That's so great too, because I can just speak, and I'm sure there are people listening who know that is a dying art. And it's another thing that keeps people out of animal husbandry, I think, is that layer of, these sheep need shearing. I mean, I work with hair sheep for that reason, but
a lot of grazers do. Yeah.
But I mean, I really love the look of the woolly sheep, and that fiber. Wool is my what I wear, but it's one more thing that I just can't personally do. Mm-hmm. And so what you say about, having that layered system where it's, it's not the farmer's responsibility. There's a system that is in place for this. So did they find you guys, or how did that connection even get made in the first place?
Actually, it was their RCD, the Santa Cruz RCD, who we work with Sasha and Dan, who I love, both of them. I mean, I am so hooked on RCDs, and the people working at RCDs, they're just incredible human beings. So they found out about Fibershed and reached out to Fibershed, and Rancho Las Palmas became members. And then through that membership, funding we were able to provide that day of, and all the shearers worked for free. Like, there's a lot of free labor, but we had to fund like the corral system and the meds and all that kind of stuff. But what was learned, and the engagement and the community and the connection and all the translated documents that now the RCD gets to use if any of their other potential producers want to implement agriculture, they were there too. They came to the day and helped that entire day.
Absolutely.
So it was a brilliant connection of all the pieces, and the RCD found Fibershed. And that's how we kind of were able to make that all happen.
I want to just double click on something that you just highlighted for me, which made a light bulb go off. Because, I think that it's really easy to, especially as hardworking, farmers, to criticize this idea of, free labor or whatever. And I think that that's fair. There's a time when it's an appropriate observation to make that, oh, that happened for free, but how does this work if we want to create durable systems? But I think that when it's part of this idea that we're building community infrastructure, that volunteerism and service is an investment oftentimes in future economies that don't currently exist. And the only way they're going to exist is with active training of people. And so I think that we need to give ourselves the grace to differentiate between when a system is really only being propped up by free labor, which we could look at the commercial food system and point to the ways that that's being propped up with some artificial money. But then I think, to your point, that's not a commitment to volunteer in perpetuity. It is a commitment to gain some community, to develop a skill that is desperately needed in many communities. And so it's a real investment. And I love that you brought that up because I think it's important.
Yeah, and I agree. It is nuanced and delicate. But what this project did was take two people, basically two needs, and put them together, and they served each other.
Yeah.
Because the sheep shearers that came, Stephanie Wilkes was the trainer mentor. She's been doing it a long time. She's written a book. If anybody hasn't look up her book. It's on learning how to shear. And fiber systems and all that kind of stuff. But the shearers, they don't feel comfortable being paid yet. They've had a week of school.
Right.
But they would love to find people who have 100 sheep that are not so worried about the shearing being a perfect shear job.
Right.
So it was like, Rancho Las Palmas, just get it off.
Yeah.
It's like, we weren't worried about, we're like, if you're working with some fiber flocks, it's really important how you shear because the fiber needs to come off in one way and it needs to be processed in a way. So what those young, meaning they were all different ages, but young to shearing. I think we probably had some from the ages of our new shearers were like 25 to 55.
Wow.
So
That's
there's
so
some
cool
ladies out there in their 50s starting shearing, and I love it. So they need to have more shear jobs under their belt in which they are just there to learn and practice and train in a safe place where they have support and animals that they don't, or a clientele that are not going to be super concerned about it being a perfect job,
Yeah.
So the connection was what we needed. And we needed a Rancho Las Palmas for those people to get training, and the Rancho Las Palmas needed their services. So it was, rather than just being a free labor, it was a training opportunity for a skilled laborer to get more training where they could go out and actually have clientele. And a farmer who needed that training as well on how do we best manage these systems, because healthy sheep build healthy soil.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what they really wanted to do, was focus on how do we keep these sheep healthy so we can continue to improve our crop system.
And every time they look at their patchy sheep, they will realize that they contributed to the future shearing capacity of the region. I mean, you could imagine having massage schools also bring in their trainees so that the shearing trainees could get massages.
Right, you're right. That's what we need, because I tell you, it was like a 14-hour day or something, and at the end we were wiped.
Yeah,
it was
toss around some sheep.
Beautiful, but there's something so amazing when you have that many people come together, and at like 6 a.m. the Rancho Las Palmas family are starting the barbecue, and they're beginning to cook the pork that they're serving for lunch, and just like the engagement and the trust and the community and the multi-language conversation.
Mm-hmm.
It was a really brilliant experience, and I felt very lucky to have been a part of it.
What a beautiful story to wrap up on. Okay, so how do people find you? How do people learn about what you're doing? What's the best way to support what you're doing, et cetera, et cetera?
Great. Yeah. Find me. The easiest way to find me and kind of learn a little bit more is my website, which is Wild Oat Hollow, and that's OAT.com. And if you go there, there's a video about the Herding Hope Grazing Cooperative, and you can also read the Community Grazing Anthology, which is an anthology in which a lot of the grazing cooperatives and the indigenous fire ecologists kind of wrote their story, and they're all in a big anthology about why we stay on this land, why we're tending this land in a fire system, and how we've dealt with the fire and how we're dealing with it in the future, to give you a little bit of a background. And then through there, you can email me. It's just sarah.keiser at Wild Oat Hollow. It's very easy to reach out with questions or thoughts. I'm always open for an email or a phone conversation to talk about what's going on with you and your visions and plans and how I might be able to support it. I do believe this concept is replicatable anywhere you go. It is a place-based concept. So wherever you live, wherever your home is, it's about connecting to that landscape and finding what works for that landscape and that community of people. It's replicable, but not in a kind of a micro scale. And I am just here to support that and help you create a system and a way forward, and then be any sort of mentor role as you come into your failures, because I guarantee you'll have them. And thank God for that.
Indeed. And your website is beautiful. That anthology is so powerful. I've shared it with a bunch of people already. And so everybody listening should definitely check that out. And you are a consultant. And so you know, this is part of how you support yourself. And I think it's a real gift that you're sharing.
Thank you. Yeah.
So is there anything that we didn't cover that you wish we had?
Nothing that I can think of. I think we did a lot of good coverage. It was great.
I think, I mean, it's such a hopeful story, empowering on so many levels, things that I think we don't realize that we've lost, that we're desperate to get back, is all wrapped up into some of these projects that you have been a part of. And I think if people take the time to read that anthology, they'll feel how that really comes through. Because we can talk about, you know, what it's like to be part of a community that's been so desperately affected by fire or tornadoes or whatever it is. Everybody has their experience with that. But I think that one of the things that I really got out of reading that anthology is the personalization of what it means to take that first step of empowering yourself and knowing that we are a part of this landscape. And so its outcomes are our outcomes, and we all have a role to play there. And I really am grateful to you for what you've done and what you're doing. And I'm grateful to your children for supporting you through that, and your sheep.
Thank you.
Oh, and you sell your stuff. You sell wool, right?
Yeah. I on my website,
I
sell lots of fiber products. Right now, I just have wool yarn, but I will be having blankets and hides soon. So woven blankets from the sheep. And if you are purchasing any of those projects, it is directly supporting the Pengrove Grazing Project.
Awesome.
The sheep that are out tending the neighbors' lands, that's who you're taking care of. And they all have names. So I can send you a list of names. You can see their pictures.
Absolutely.
On Instagram. If you want to follow me on Instagram, I kind of am able to, it's Wild Oat Hollow Instagram, and you're able to kind of see the messaging. And if you go to my website and join my newsletter, I do send out kind of a lot of updates and what's happening. And there's some literature in there on my website for the Petaluma Grazing Project. If you're in a zone in which you think there may be a municipality interested in kind of starting one of these projects, they highlight it really well in their PDF that's on the website. And so, I think the key, one last thing I would love to say, and this is for all of our agrarians and our people and everybody. One of the things, if you look outside or in your work and you see something that is a burden that you're overwhelmed with, if perhaps you can take a step back and look and see how that could be a resource for someone or something or some entity. That's how we begin to change things, by looking at our burdens and finding them, turning them into resources. So really think about, how can I look at this differently, and it becomes a resource to someone, if not yourself. And then there goes your collaboration, because then that person comes into your world, or animals.
What a brilliant mic drop statement. I think you've really just, you've played us out, as we say in the business. And I'm so grateful that I got this opportunity to hang out with you.
Thank you. Yes, it was lovely.
I really look forward to interacting in person at some point. And just, again, so much gratitude for what you're doing. And we'll all be looking to see what's on the horizon for you, and follow along. And hopefully there's going to be a lot of projects that grow out of this that are inspired by what you've already started.
I hope so too. Yeah. Look forward to it. Look forward to more weaving webs.
Yes. Thank you, Sarah. I can't possibly say how annoying it is to me that I've become a quote person. I'm gonna, because Mr. Rogers, again, he says it better than anyone, and I miss him. I miss you, Mr. Rogers. So, in the immortal words of Mr. Rogers, I hope you're proud of yourself for the times you've said yes, when all it meant was extra work for you and was seemingly helpful only to somebody else. Because every single act, when we help each other, has benefits we can't possibly imagine. And most of you already know this, but I just want to bang this drum of cheerleading for everyone out there who is working hard to build community where they are. This is an oddly reverent moment for Mimi Casteel. So, listen close. I appreciate what you're doing and what you're trying to do. And I'm not the only one. You're not alone. And really, we're going to do great things together. I'm going to go put on a cardigan and a necktie and some loafers and just live my Mr. Rogers. I'll see you guys next time.
I hope you enjoyed that episode. Real quick, some things that we have going on. Make sure you are following along on YouTube. Last week, we posted a video ranking tomato trellising options. This weekend, we got a glimpse into the Wash Pack Station and the rest of Mountain Roots Farm in Tennessee with Paul Wargo. Find that channel and those videos by searching No-Till Growers on YouTube. We'll put a link in the show notes as well. And also linked in the show notes is our shop, where you can find my book, The Living Soil Handbook, and hats and other merch. Buying those things through us helps to support our work and helps keep this information free and open to anyone. Alternatively, you can join a whole bunch of new supporters through patreon.com/no-till-growers and who get a bunch of discounts from various companies on seeds and footwear and all sorts of other goodies. That Patreon page is the absolute lifeblood of our work, and we dearly appreciate you. And at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs this week to Mark Ravenel, Chris Yates, Sean at All About the Garden, Stephen Smith, and Cameron Prybol. Huge shout out to whoever supports us in whatever way that you can. Otherwise, thanks for listening. We'll catch you all next week. Bye.